Florida is often sold as the ultimate American vacation paradise, but beneath the glow of neon and beaches, a much denser reality pulses. It is not just the Sunshine State, it is a peninsula surrounded by dark waters, where atmospheric pressure seems to crush the sanity of those who stay too long. What the world consumes as bizarre internet memes is, in truth, the visible face of a social and environmental collapse with no modern parallel. The heat is not merely a high temperature, but a chemical agent that alters human behavior, turning mild irritation into blind fury in mere seconds. Imagine living under 90% humidity, where the air is so heavy that breathing becomes a constant physical effort for the human body. This prolonged thermal stress acts directly on the central nervous system, eroding the layers of civility that keep primitive impulses under absolute control. Criminology studies suggest that rising temperatures are directly linked to the escalation of violent crimes and erratic behaviors in densely populated areas. When the sun reaches its zenith and the asphalt begins to melt, the mind seems to follow suit, losing the ability to distinguish right from wrong. It is in this scenery of constant boiling that the darkest stories begin to be written. Far from the tourist brochures of Orlando or Miami Beach, the state's geography also plays a fundamental role in this sense of isolation and despair, with the swamp serving as a physical and psychological barrier. The Everglades is not just a protected ecosystem. It is a graveyard of secrets, and a constant reminder that the wild is always one step from reclaiming the city. Living surrounded by prehistoric predators and stagnant waters creates a survivalist mentality that shapes the psyche in a unique and brutal way. This constant struggle against a hostile environment generates a mental weariness that many try to anesthetize with substances, creating a cycle of addiction and hallucination. The swamp seems to exhale a vapor that numbs morality, where the isolation of rural roads allows the bizarre to flourish without interference. It is not just a geographical coincidence. It is a territory that rejects order and favors the emergence of behaviors that defy any established social logic. To understand why these events reach the public so frequently, we must analyze the backbone of the information system: the transparency laws. In 1967, Florida adopted the Government in the Sunshine Act, a piece of legislation that opened the doors of every local public institution. What appears to be a triumph of democracy became, in practice, the largest factory for exposing human misery ever created by a state bureaucracy. Unlike other states, where arrest records and sordid investigative details are protected by privacy, in Florida, everything is exposed to the public in real time. Every mistake made under the influence, every psychotic break, and every family tragedy is digitized and made available to anyone with internet access. This law created an incessant flow of data that feeds the global perception that Florida is an open-air asylum, without any filter or prior censorship. The media quickly realized that the content generated by these laws was a goldmine for digital engagement and global television ratings. Thus, the Florida Man phenomenon was born not just from the frequency of crimes, but from the ease with which these crimes can be commercially exploited. The result is a distortion of reality, where human suffering and mental illness are packaged as bizarre entertainment for the digital mass. This constant public exposure creates a mirror effect, where residents themselves begin to internalize the bizarreness as part of their unique regional identity. If the world expects Florida to be chaotic, the environment provides the necessary elements for that prophecy to fulfill itself daily inside every precinct. Transparency, while democratic, removed the veil of human dignity, transforming personal tragedy into a freak show consumed by millions of people. Behind every terrifying headline, there is a rigorous investigative process that reveals the failure of social support structures in the hot, sunny state. When we read about absurd acts involving animals or bizarre weapons, what the official document truly describes is extreme poverty and the despair of a lost soul. The documentation of these facts exposes an open wound in American society, where bizarreness is merely the final symptom of decades of neglect. Internal migration and the transient nature of the population create an environment where social roots are shallow and a sense of community is non-existent. Many people arrive in the state fleeing dark pasts, seeking an easy restart, but they find a brutal service economy and an entirely suffocating cost of living. Without a support network of family or longtime friends, isolation becomes a catalyst for mental decline and recurring antisocial behaviors. Florida's cities are often clusters of gated communities, sitting right next to zones of absolute poverty, creating a contrast that breeds deep resentment. Bizarre crime often flourishes in these friction zones, where the dream of wealth collides with the reality of a precarious life without future prospects. Violence in Florida has its own signature, marked by improvisation and a strangeness that reflects the chaos of a life devoid of emotional stability. The synthetic drug crisis found an ideal testing ground in the peninsula, with substances destroying entire neighborhoods in a very short amount of time. These drugs do not just addict, they induce states of paranoia and superhuman strength that turn ordinary citizens into nightmare figures on coastal streets. Hospital records describe attacks that seem straight out of science fiction movies, but they are daily occurrences for night patrols across the state. The Miami zombie incident in 2012 remains the most extreme example of this chemical and psychological disintegration occurring under the camera's gaze. That attack was so brutal and irrational that it forced the nation to look at Florida not as a vacation spot, but as an epicenter of real human horror. The forensic investigation revealed a void of motivation, a crime that happened simply because the attacker's mind had transformed into a total wasteland. The use of these substances is often a getaway mechanism for a population dealing with the trauma of recurring natural disasters and loss of property. Hurricanes do not just destroy houses, they destroy the sense of security and continuity, leaving behind a population in a state of permanent traumatic shock. In Florida, the external chaos of the weather merges with the internal chaos of the human mind, generating behavioral explosions that defy modern psychiatry. Beyond drugs, there is a constant presence of firearms in a legislative environment that favors direct confrontation and self-defense without the duty to retreat. This stand your ground law changed the dynamic of social interactions, making any insignificant disagreement have the potential to turn fatal within minutes. The fear of the other is a constant, and in a state where everyone may be armed, paranoia becomes a collectively accepted defense mechanism. Florida's justice system is one of the most productive and rigid in the country, generating a massive amount of public documentation on local criminality. Every hour, hundreds of new mugshots are added to databases, feeding websites that profit from the perpetual exposure of someone else's infamy and error. This bureaucratic machine does not sleep, and its efficiency in recording crime is far superior to its ability to prevent the social decay that causes it. We observe a state that has become an involuntary laboratory of the human condition, pushed to its extreme limit of stress and constant public exposure. There is no place for the silent mistake in Florida. Every moral stumble is amplified and distributed as entertainment for a cynical and cold global audience. The Florida man phenomenon is, therefore, the byproduct of transparency legislation operating inside a social and climatic pressure cooker without valves. Police authorities admit that the volume of calls involving absurd situations drains the resources that should be used to fight organized and serious crimes. Officers spend hours dealing with individuals in psychotic breaks who believe they are deities or are fighting imaginary wars in the swamp. This routine of absurdity wears down law enforcement, creating a cycle of cynicism and hardening that directly affects the quality of public safety. Rapid expansion architecture also contributes to this disorientation, with identical suburbs stretching for miles, removing natural and stable geographical landmarks. Living in an artificial environment, where nature is constantly repelled by asphalt and concrete, generates a sense of disconnection from the organic world. This urban non-place facilitates mental dissociation, allowing individuals to lose touch with the basic norms of healthy social behavior and coexistence. Predatory tourism brings millions of people who treat the state as a playground without consequences, acting in ways they would never dare in their hometowns. This eternal vacation energy clashes with the harsh reality of local workers, creating an atmosphere of permanent tension between futile leisure and survival. The result is conflict in hotels, bars, and theme parks that frequently ends in police reports, filled with surreal, violent, and deeply sad details. Economic disparities in Florida are visible at every corner, where million-dollar mansions share the horizon with trailer slums in deplorable conditions. This social abyss generates opportunistic and often irrational criminality, driven by a social envy that heat and drugs only potentiate every single day. The American dream in Florida has a metallic taste of blood and sweat, and the frustration of failing to reach it breaks many individuals aggressively. In analyzing the timeline of these events, we realize that bizarreness is not a recent outbreak, but an intrinsic characteristic of the peninsula's colonization. Since the first explorers got lost in the marshes, Florida's been a place of false promises and dangers, hidden beneath very shallow waters. Modernity merely provided a camera and an internet connection, so these ancestral horrors could be transmitted in real time to the modern world. Many crimes remain unsolved, not for lack of evidence, but because Florida's very nature seems to conspire to hide the tracks of the guilty. Bodies vanish in the stomachs of predators, or are swept away by strong tides, leaving behind only the mystery and the urban legend that haunts locals. The silence following these disappearances is more deafening than the screams captured in viral videos of high-speed police chase. Precincts hold files on cases that defy forensic logic, involving occult rituals practiced in isolated clearings during the full moon of a humid summer. The mix of cultures and beliefs brought by immigrants from around the world creates a syncretism that sometimes assumes violent and disturbing forms. The fear of the supernatural walks hand in hand with the fear of real violence, creating an atmosphere of constant psychological terror for all residents. The psychological impact of growing up where the absurd is the norm creates a generation of youth who view bizarre violence with total indifference. Cynicism becomes a necessary armor to survive a news cycle that treats the death and suffering of others as simple, passing internet jokes. This desensitization is the invisible cost of the Florida Man phenomenon, a price paid by the mental health of an entire population exposed to daily chaos. Public health reports indicate that suicide and depression rates in the state are alarming, contrasting with the Sunshine State image sold in colorful commercials. Loneliness in the middle of a tourist crowd is a cruel reality for many seniors who chose Florida to spend their final years. Social abandonment is the silent fuel burning beneath the loud headlines, pushing many to the edge of sanity before the final collapse recorded by police. Prisons are overcrowded with individuals who are, in truth, victims of a system that offers no real treatment for mental illness or severe addiction. Mass incarceration only postpones the problem, returning traumatized people to society who are ready to star in the next bizarre event of the week. The crime and exposure cycle is profitable for major news outlets, but devastating for the social fabric trying to keep the state functional. There is no simple conclusion to the Florida enigma, as it is composed of multiple layers of human, environmental, and legislative failures overlapping today. What we can affirm is that the peninsula serves as a warning to the rest of the world about the danger of abandoning privacy in the social safety net. Florida's darkness doesn't need shadows to exist. It manifests under the midday sun, clear and cruel for all those who dare to look. Every arrest record is a chapter in a real-life horror book that continues to be written, with no prediction of a happy ending for those involved. The state will continue to produce its monsters, as long as the pressure and temperature conditions remain at this critical point of mental and social rupture. The swamp will keep advancing, the laws will keep exposing the flaws, and the human mind will keep yielding under the weight of an untamed environment. The Florida Man phenomenon is, ultimately, the cry of a society that has lost control over its own narrative of order, progress, and personal dignity. We are left to observe, with a mix of fascination and dread, the next headlines that will inevitably emerge from the murky, warm waters of the American peninsula. Security cameras will continue to record the last moments of sanity for men and women lost in their own deep mental, chemical, and existential deserts. There are no heroes in these documentary stories, only survivors and spectators of a social shipwreck happening in slow motion before our eyes. Florida is the mirror reflecting what happens when civilization fails to protect its most fragile members from the unbearable pressure of modern existence. Every siren cutting through the humid night air is a reminder that chaos never truly sleeps in the territory that has always belonged to the predators. The price of instant fame in the Sunshine State is the total loss of personal history, replaced by a cruel paragraph of text and a low-resolution mugshot. The shock economy will continue to thrive as long as there is an audience willing to laugh at the misfortune of others protected by the label of regional curiosity. What do you think motivates the endless chaos in the Sunshine State? And what is your theory on this bizarre phenomenon? Comment on what you think about the case. Subscribe to the channel for more dark investigations, and leave your like on the video now.